Sounds good. All right, have a good day. You know what I realized? I didn't even say goodbye to you.
James Tucker, 17, at Comcast.net. I have a pain in the ass getting into it, so I just, the hell with it, I don't need it. And I got nothing to hide, you know, let them subpoena whatever I have.
I just spoke with Marietta, and she said she's going to call Steve, and he's going to do it.
Good, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling the transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Hi, Paul. How are you? Nice to meet you.
So I assume just sit out here until we're ready, or?
So is Robert expecting to come by ferry, or is he making different?
I have no idea.
Pardon?
The only thing I brought is
So perhaps he's using his car and coming here this way.
Where?
Usually right out here, over here a little bit, where you want that.
So, how much time do you, because your offices are still on. Last time I went to your offices.
It's rented until we get a permanent place. I'm going to be back on Sunday.
Because I think we're last time.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's just not
So,
This is cute. On Facebook, posted by Bob Packett. There's no moral or double entendre or anything else. It's just cute. Here.
Catherine, nice to meet you. Catherine was here. Yeah, right, yeah.
Test it.
Okay, thanks, sir.
There's supposedly another captain for traffic for some buildings or in San Francisco.
One, two, test. One, two.
I have a cold.
Doesn't want to get sick.
I see you brought lunch or dinner?
John Crowder.
Snuck right in here and didn't even say hi to me. You got 10 minutes before your meeting.
How are you?
Good.
Do you know these gentlemen? Commissioner Will Hessinger?
John Crowder?
John Crowder.
I think I met you before. Yeah, I met you. I have a cold. Oh, well, yeah. Okay. Anyway, my condolences and my congratulations for being river commissioner.
This is Mr. South San Francisco right here.
Yeah, I kind of know. I've been here forever. Family's been here since the 1800s. Yeah. But I ran for city council this last go around. Only 6,000 people decided to vote, with 8 people running for the damn seat. I can't believe it. Wow. Unbelievable. It was really depressing. Anyway, what was I telling your staff? You gotta change the schedule for this thing. My votes were literally in a dog. Well, one vote, and then put the other vote in the middle, 9:30, 11 o'clock, and then the other, play another round at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then the last one at everybody home. 450 people. It's amazing. I was on with her once. Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Ridiculous. I'm going out Sunday if you guys want to go. Yeah, and I said, we would have waived 700 because I'm going anyway, so. I'm used to pulling that damn form out too. When's the new agent coming again? Well, that's a good question. It's supposed to be, they canceled it for this year, but now I heard that they may. No, I get it. Yeah, I heard. I didn't know when. Okay, well, not a few days. Well, if you guys decide you're going to let somebody else I'll show you about what it's called. You know, that's my passion. Yeah. Well, I got tired of it. I mean, you can only be on the planning commission for so long, 4 years, I'm saying.
fun sometimes.
We'll go to here, and we got Vegas last night. Too cheap to pay for the fees over there. I was here this morning, and I was like, I came out early because the chicken was still 4 o'clock in the morning, like 35 pounds. But anyway, I was you guys. Testing.
Responded back to your email. When he was calling to come there,
That was today.
today I talked to him.
Okay, because I talked to staff and they said to me this afternoon about 2 o'clock. It wasn't 2 o'clock.
Did they say that? Yeah, I think I talked to him after that. So,
We could ask staff. That's what I related to. That's exactly what
I'll ask.
it's supposed to ask staff. Makes sense.
I think we have to now do this again.
Yeah,
They should have been invited.
yeah. I think he was though. Let's ask. We'll ask. I think he was. Okay, well, we can ask. I don't know.
No, we're almost going up.
Except I was told.
Almost party.
It's a good question to ask, and I could ask it if you like, but definitely should be asked. I got, you know what, I received 2 agendas. Did anyone else get 2 agendas? Yeah, you know what? Are they the same? Is that the only thing?
Yeah,
That's so stupid. She had to change it for that? Cool one, you slept last night. Darn, you mean it wasn't true? You mean it wasn't true? Darn.
Operating from its secret mountain headquarters on the planet Earth, Captain Video rallies men of goodwill and leads them against the forces of evil everywhere. As he rockets from planet to planet, let us follow the champion of justice, truth, and freedom throughout the universe.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for coming
Stand
today.
by for Captain Video. And here's Video Racer.
Hey, everybody. Commissioner, how are you?
Great.
Sir?
Sharks fan doing?
I have a cold, but I would shake your hand otherwise. But,
Oh, you're.
Sharks fan is doing well. I was at the Pittsburgh game, and it was just very exciting.
They knocked them out of Pittsburgh.
Yep. 2 goals down. They came back like they owned the place.
Last night they did well.
6 goals last night. They play tomorrow night. Columbus, I think they play. I think so.
It is very nice. Those things that they gave, who's the coach from Toronto? When he used to be in Anaheim. The Toronto just played Anaheim the other night, gave him a,
Yeah, I forget. It was nice.
yeah, that was really nice.
Nice to be recognized.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the March 12th, 2014 special meeting of the San Mateo County Harbor Board of Harbor Commissioners. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Brennan? Here. Commissioner Holsinger?
Here.
Commissioner Pierbano?
Here.
Commissioner Tucker?
Here.
President Bernardo?
Here. Next item is public comments, questions. There are speaker cards from the public. Okay, there are none. Okay, we are now at continued business, item 1, titled The Report Outside Facilitator for Harbor Commission Functioning. Mr. Grinnell, do you have a report?
Very brief one. Pursuant to prior Harbor Commission decision, we arranged this special meeting for you to interview prospective facilitator candidates. That was the wish of the commission. And we have with us today 2 candidates. We had canvassed and found several, but they were either eliminated for one reason or another or chose not to participate. And so we have 2 with us today. We have Catherine McCracken and Paul Wright. You have received background information on them in your packets. And so they and we are at your service as you proceed.
Okay, thank you. You know what I'd like to do is, I would, if Mr. Wright. Okay, thank you. We'll get to that in just a sec. So what I'd like to do to just facilitate this, since Mr. Wright and Ms. McCracken are here tonight, why don't we have them address the commission just to share a few things about themselves with us, just so that we kind of get to know them a little bit better. And then that may result in questions from the commission, and then we can address any questions that commissioners might have. Will that work for everyone?
That works for me, but I'd like to ask my question about the report.
Okay.
Just to get that.
Sure. Commissioner Brennan.
So thank you for organizing the meeting tonight. I noticed that last time we had this on the agenda, we were looking at a list of facilitators that included EHI Management Consulting, and I wondering why they were not invited to participate tonight and give a presentation with the other consultants who are here. I'm curious about why they weren't included.
They were invited, they chose not to attend.
I spoke to Brent Ives today, and he told me that he was not invited and that he would have liked to attend.
That's not what I received from him, by way of information.
What did you receive from him? Because he said that he thought that he was going to be invited and that he had a very positive conversation with you.
Well, that's not my understanding. He basically said his schedule was very difficult and it would take a whole day out of his time, and he was not particularly inclined to participate in this type of process.
And did he say that via email?
No, I had a phone conversation with him.
Okay, because I talked to him today and he was disappointed that he wasn't invited to participate in the process.
Well, I've told you what he told me.
It's very odd. And I really don't see how we can move forward without having all three interested consultants here at the meeting to interview. I think it's unfair.
That you should address to your colleagues on the board.
So I think you guys heard what I said. I really think this is a flawed process. We were supposed to have 3 consultants here, and 3 were not invited. So I'm very concerned about why that happened, and I think we could remedy it, but I think we need to have all 3 consultants interviewed. And there's no point in hiring a facilitator when we haven't heard from the 3 facilitators, so it's a problem.
Okay, so I'm hearing 2 different things. I'm hearing a conversation that you had, and I'm hearing about a conversation that Mr. Grinnell had. And at this point, I mean, unless,
Should we call Brent right now?
I would like to ask my colleagues what they think about trying to get a hold of another facilitator. Well, I mean, the thing is, even if we were to get a hold of Mr. Ives, he's in Sacramento, is that right?
He's not in Sacramento.
He's not in Sacramento. Okay. My colleagues. I'm kind of torn because it's like we have candidates here tonight who have prepared to speak tonight. And
I feel bad about it too, but it's really unfortunate that management did not alert Brent Ives to the opportunity this evening, and
I heard that management did. I heard that Mr. Grinnell did. That's what I heard.
that's
just
not
now.
what Brent said today.
She said.
Why would he say that he hadn't been invited
Don't know.
if he had?
Don't know. So my colleagues, I'm going to look at my other colleagues for their input. What
I'd like to move forward with what we have now.
I would like to move forward. I'd like to move forward where we have, if this other gentleman can get us a timely written communication suggesting that he wanted to be part of the process and he could have been here today, that perhaps we can interview him separately as part of one of the near future board meetings, but I'd want to see that in writing from him.
And I concur with my fellow commissioners here, and I also agree with Commissioner Holsinger in that if we can get a communication from him, like an email communication, expressing that he really wants to be here, then I would also entertain some sort of report, or for him to show up at the next meeting, or at something like that. I would entertain that. But having 2 other consultants, potential consultants here tonight, I think we should move forward in a timely manner. So,
If I may, President, the reason why we scheduled a special meeting here was twofold. One, because on our regular agenda, we simply didn't have time, because those agendas tend to go 4 hours. We just simply didn't have time to be able to listen to you, hear you, and ask you questions. And the other was, of course, to try and find a time that was mutually convenient on your schedules as well. So if this other gentleman does come forward and show a written interest and show that he would have been part of the process if communication had been clear, then there's no reason why we couldn't simply put that on the agenda for next week or the agenda for 2 2 weeks after that, on our regular schedule to go through the process with one person.
Thank you. To me, that sounds very reasonable and very fair.
Just to be clear, are we directing staff to send an email to him and invite him to participate on, and ask him when he can make the meeting?
That's what I'm hearing. Is that okay?
I wasn't suggesting that Mr. Grinnell undertake to have more communication than he has. Or General Manager, Commissioner Brennan has suggested that there was a miscommunication and she had a different perception, so perhaps since she's in communication with this person,
Good point.
She can have him communicate with the General Manager to express those sentiments, and that would be sufficient.
Oh, okay.
Either way works as far as I'm concerned, is if, our general manager has one perception about what he expressed, our commissioner has another, we're here based upon what the commissioner's impression was, or the general manager's impression was.
Right.
However we proceed is fine.
Okay, Commissioner Brennan, if you wouldn't mind then, since you also had a conversation with him, asking him to confirm with us that he would like to be considered and send an email and just, we'd be happy to work with him and get him on the calendar if he is interested.
I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so with our two guests tonight, Mr. Wright and Ms. McCracken, who would like to go first? Does it matter? I have, on the report, since we have, just in the order of the report here, Mr. Wright, why don't we have Mr. Wright just share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Mr. Grinnell asked for material, so I'm not sure what's in the packet. Just a quick Bible reference.
Thank you.
So my thought is maybe give 3 to 5 minutes, just kind of a brief overview, introduction. And my experience with these kinds of sessions is questions, and so I think what you're real interested in. So again, I'm Paul Wright. I have a company called Milestone Consulting. My first career was in association management. I managed local chambers of commerce here in Northern California. For the last 20 years, I've been in the organization development consulting business. My practice focuses on 3 primary areas. Significant portion of my practice for years has been what I call strategic alignment, which is fundamentally the work I did with the board a number of years ago. And it really has 2 pieces. I mean, one of the things you potentially learn in this process is when it comes to facilitators, they generally fall in one camp or the other. They're either more relationship facilitators, working on the relationships of the board or the commission, or they're more on the strategy, goals, direction. And with the strategic alignment approach, it's really working on both at the same time, generally speaking. About the other potential big segment of my practice is executive coaching. So I work with a number of middle and senior leadership and working on professional and skill development. And then finally, the last probably 10 years since I did my doctorate is part of my practice that's growing the most is in change management, particularly working with culture change work. So that's kind of the focus. Clients after 20 years, about 50% of my clients have been private businesses, everything from very large financial services business to 2- and 3-person entrepreneurial business people, and everything. Probably about 25% of my practice has been with associations and nonprofits, and about 25% of the practice has been with public entities, predominantly cities, a couple 3 special districts like the Harvard District, worked with the Burbank Airport Commission a number of years ago. So that's a bit of a mix of clientele. Typically, lastly, the approach here is when I'm approached in terms of have a baseline understanding of what I hear is going on, my recommendation always is to really first start with some kind of an assessment. Understand, what are the issues? If you were to do some work, what would be the objectives? What level of agreement do we see between the commissioners in terms of, are we on the same page in terms of what the outcomes would be? And so typically that would be, interviewing the commissioners and preparing a report, and, typically that's depending on how many interviews, 8 to 12 hours of work. So that's why I recommend when in doubt where to start, because at the end of that process, you have, my diagnosis, you have my suggestions in terms of the prognosis, and then based on the prognosis, my recommendations about, what, if there were potential steps going forward, what would they be and what would be the cost structure for that. So I'm just going to stop there and stop there with that kind of prelude.
Thank you.
Any questions at this point, or do you want to hear Catherine from next? How do you want to do this?
You know what, why don't we do this? Why don't we have her go next, and then I think that having heard both of you, then that will generate questions. Thank you.
I have cards for each of you. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Catherine McCracken, and I've been I guess I'd call it a facilitator for about 20 years now, mostly in the environmental arena, working usually with clients that are government agencies convening big group processes like advisory committees or negotiated rulemaking processes that have a real high community interest and a lot of different stakeholders, and they need somebody to work with them on just structuring how they work and how they work together. I've also done a lot of volunteer mediation work and some conflict kind of assessment, and I guess I call it resetting. One project I worked on last year was with an international organization with a training program, and they were trying to revise their program. It kind of went off the rails a bit for a variety of reasons, and so they asked me to come and work with them to look at where they were starting from and what had happened, and kind of turn them from being quite stuck actually with that conflict to thinking about the future and what would move them forward. And in fact, that was what the report work plan was called, which was a better way, because people kept saying we need to find a better way to do what we want to do. And I think that resonates a lot when I work with groups in conflict, is that things can get stuck, and people always want to find a better way, and they might just need some assistance to do that. So, primarily I see my role as somebody who, I say this and then I'll explain it. Basically, my main goal is to put myself out of business with you. And what I mean by that is, when a group asks me to work with them, it's not forever. It's to sort of get things back on track, to understand what's going on, where people are starting from, and where you want to go. And if you all want to go to the same place, and sometimes that's a source of discussion, a shared vision of what the future can look like, and work with you to help you get to that place, and then I go away. And so, coming in to work with groups, I think is always an interesting thing, because you have the passion, obviously, as the commissioners of the district, to implement the mission of this agency that's, 81 years old, I think now. And so I'm something that obviously you all take very seriously and have a lot of passion for. So that's my main kind of goal in working with groups, is to help you do what you want to do, and define that. In terms of how that happens, very similar. I always, and I know that Peter and I talked about this on the phone, start with that kind of one-on-one discussion with each person to kind of assess where things are starting from and get some sense of what your shared goals are, what questions might need to be addressed to move you to a different place. And usually the outcome of that is a report. And when I say report, sometimes it can be like a PowerPoint presentation. I know we all probably have lots of reports on our shelves, and I've done those too. For some processes, the less paper that people have to read, the better. So it's depending on what your group wants in terms of level of depth of what that reporting looks like. So that's something we would talk about too. And that product is something that results in, okay, what do we do now? Is it that it's a work plan or other what does that deliverable look like? Usually comes out of that assessment process and interviewing each of you, and maybe also district staff as well. Similar, the little I know about the situation and my own research sort of tells me, in my own gut of working with people, tells me that you want to start a new chapter in how you work together, and you're looking to maybe have some assistance to do that. Process matters, as we've just seen, right? So I definitely encourage you to find the person that you feel will work best with you, whoever that is. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to entertain any questions from commissioners regarding both of the presentations. And thank you both for that. That really helped us, I think, get to know you a little bit, aside from, just looking at your bios here on paper. So commissioners, questions?
Could we have them sit together at one table?
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Great idea. So here's what I'd like to have happen in terms of process, is I'd like to have each commissioner, whatever question is asked, can you both answer the same question? Sure. And, we may or may not get the same answer. It's just going to be very interesting to hear.
Alternate who answers, so it's not the same person answering first.
Sure, absolutely. We'll do it that way. Sounds good. So questions, commissioners?
I just have a couple of questions. Can you both give us an idea of cost structure? What would you charge? Is it a flat fee? Is it an hourly fee? For example, you said 10 or 12 hours of interviews with the commissioners and other people. And I want to make sure that, is that part of the whole package? Is that not part? What do you envision the costs being?
I've done both. Typically, the front end with the assessment, I charge a daily rate of $2,500 a day. So if it's 8 hours to 12, it's going to run between, for the assessment piece, $2,500 to $3,750, probably in that price range. When it comes to the actual plan of action, or the treatment program, if you will, again, I've done both based on what's going to work best for the client. Sometimes, in terms of budget, it's just impossible to do it by an hourly rate, just because it might be too open-ended. To Catherine's point, our job is to work ourselves out of a job.
How do you feel about evening? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure. Similarly, I've done both. And this is sort of similar to the project I did last year, and we did that on an hourly basis. So it depends on how many interviews, but I usually kind of plan for an hour to an hour and a half per person. And then I usually plan for, say, if I've done sort of 8 interviews, if it's a small group of people, and if the end product is that kind of written report, that might be another 8 hours to sort of do and get everybody reviewed, and but that can be less if it's not as full. So that's usually an hourly rate. My hourly rate is $150 an hour. So depending on how many, it's hard to guess when you don't know how many people you might talk with, but if it's sort of 10 people, the 5 of you and maybe some of the staff, so that would probably be about $20 for that assessment piece, no more than that. And I think the better conversations we have about what is desired lead to a more kind of clear vision of what's being asked and so everybody kind of is on that same page before we start. I see you nodding. Yeah, similar answer. Yeah, and post that, I think it depends on what the commission would like to see in terms of what it sees as that next step, and what would be involved there. But that could be done either on a kind of flat rate, and that's just based on what are the tasks, and I estimate, and we see if it matches.
Do you have any problem with evening meetings?
in this business, you got to be willing to go wherever, whatever time. One last piece on my piece, in that report that I would prepare to you, I would potentially, most likely, depending on what the treatment program is to have options, and so that you have at least 3 options that you can start with to find the one that's the best fit for you.
I'm finished.
I'll defer. I have several questions in whatever order you want.
Why don't you go on ahead?
So would both of you be, at the conclusion of your services, providing a written report, or is that something that's sort of in an interim phase to see whether or not any of your services proceed forward? How does that work? Is it a verbal report? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a written report. Just like Catherine, I've done both. I've done, a document, or I've done PowerPoint, whichever is the most straightforward for the client. And again, it would basically be, here are the themes that I heard. Based on these themes, and here's potentially the objectives. I hear that there are agreements from at least a majority of you. Based on those objectives, here's how I suggest, in terms of recommendations, in terms of a plan of action, how you might proceed. And then it would be options of, here are the different cost options or approach options that you might want to consider. So they would all be in writing. Yeah.
Catherine, it's pretty much the same?
Pretty similar, yes.
Okay, so
And
what-
I think, though, I think what's wonderful about assessments, and sometimes they're not done, and then sometimes groups, you can really regret that, like kind of don't want to dive into solving a problem. And I think what the assessment does is kind of give first and foremost me a chance to get to be known by the client, you. And I like breaking those 2 things into 2 phases, because I know, as Peter and I discussed when we were talking about what the process might look like, somebody can do an assessment and you might find that might not be the right person to continue working with you beyond that. And I think there's a real kind of decision point after the assessment piece to be made. So it's kind of do we go forward to continue working with somebody, or has enough clarity been presented through that process where we might be able to be done? That's one option, right? Or if we're going to continue, is that person that's been working with us that right person to continue to do that? So I think it's a real distinct clear fork in the road for that decision to be made, so that there's clarity all around about it.
Did either of you look at any of the videos of past board meetings in preparation for today? I'm not suggesting that you wouldn't do it if you were engaged, but did either of you look at doing it in preparation for today?
I didn't actually.
I reviewed the website, of course.
Okay. Do either of you have any background in education or training or reliance upon other sub-consultants, so to speak, for your services? Anyone with a background in psychology or counseling, clinical counseling?
No, I'm a sole practitioner, so it's me.
Okay. That was one of my questions.
Right, and I kind of work on one project at a time, so I can focus on one thing at a time.
So I'm a sole practitioner today as well, and as you look at my bio, 3 partners and I grew a consulting training firm here in Palo Alto for 12 years. And so as part of that, what I know about psychology is my doctorate's in human organizational studies. My senior partner was a psychologist, so what little I know about human behavior I learned from him, and the experiences we both gained, facilitating these kinds of works. I do training, I've done training, and yet, we all have where our core skills are. I'm a much better facilitator than trainer.
To go back to something that was commented on by both of you, the commission the district is in the process of embarking upon a long-term strategic planning process, which we hope will be fairly comprehensive. We haven't started on it yet, but we've all talked about it, and we've solicited bids and so forth. You've both talked about facilitating dialogues for mutual goals, that kind of thing, and that involves strategic planning as part of the process. having just learned from me for the first time that the district is already undertaking a more studied strategic planning process for all of the issues affecting the Harbor District, how does that affect what you perceive your role might be in what we've asked you to do?
You're first this time.
Sure. Well, I mentioned I was in the Chamber of Commerce business for years, and I was president-elect of the Statewide Association of Chamber Executives, and this was in the early 80s. And I made a comment at a board meeting that, isn't it curious that we're all supposed to have plans for our chambers, and we don't have a plan for the association. And you've all served on boards and commissions long enough that when you open your mouth, then what happens next is you get volunteered. So I ended up facilitating for the statewide association our strategic planning process, and then friends of mine in the business came out of the woodwork and started asking me to facilitate the retreats and their planning. So when I left the chamber business in '89, I mean literally the first 5-6 years of my practice was strategic plan. And so, frankly, it's getting rarer and rarer that organizations like yours are really, are really doing what I would call the deep dive in terms of the planning process. So, to answer your question directly, it's typically what I've done in the past is when I was already the planning process going, if you'd already selected a consultant, I would meet with he or she and see, as we, this potentially could be before or after the interviews, because the last thing I want to do is be redundant and, repeat what you're already doing and be counterproductive. So it'd be, to identify if there's value of something that we're going through with a board retreat, let's say, or a commission retreat, or is it, we just stay out of that category and we make the focus of my work with the commission a bit narrower and we stay out of the strategic direction area. And so, that becomes an agreement so that we resist, you guys duplicating and getting contradictory information.
I did look on the website and I saw the request for that process. I don't recall when that's expected to start. I apologize.
We've just put out a request for proposals. We have that to consider on a future agenda, so no decision is made other than the decision of the commission as a whole, based upon a report by the general manager, by Mr. Grinnell, about the parameters of the focus, which are fairly broad, and he did a guidelines, I guess, for the RFP. So that's where we are in that process.
Right. So it's really early, and it occurs to me that means that the work that you're considering, the two of us and the third person for, sort of all the more important to set a good springboard for that. As this was defined, to think about how does this commission function more effectively is sort of the basic, broad task that's been laid out, and that could mean a zillion things, and it probably means something different to each of you, right? So it sounds like that's such a critical springboard to the success of that longer effort. And similar to what you were saying, if something is many things going on your agenda at the same time, then whatever process or work we're doing, we need to be mindful of that and not redundant. I agree with what you said. Yeah.
So the final line of inquiry, we're doing these interviews at a publicly noticed and public proceeding. Our process, because it involves more than 2 commissioners, by virtue of the Brown Act, needs to be a public process, and yet you're being asked to facilitate these 5 people learning how to work together in the context of past interactions that have proven to be to have conflict. So is the public, tell me your opinions, each of your opinions, about how the public nature of the process that we need to be a part of for this is going to help or hinder what you perceive you're being asked to do.
I think so.
We're keeping good track, right?
Yeah.
We're good facilitators that way. I think it's probably harder for the 5 of you. I'll say that first. It's not the easiest thing as a facilitator to, I operate in the legal box that is the context of whatever I'm working on. And so I've definitely operated in that capacity at the federal level with an advisory negotiated rulemaking committee. So we had the same kind of constraints and kind of opportunities. It's how do you turn that constraint into something that can be useful to the group, to the point where, we couldn't even put our committee on a bus and give them a box lunch to go see the areas they're going to talk about, because we were told that was a meeting. Just to even understand the physical, we were talking about sort of a land use thing. And so that, can be challenging, and everybody has to be on the same page as we go forward with what does that look like. I know transparency is an issue, right? And so you have to go slow to go fast, I think, in that environment where you have to be setting up and going along with the process so that people know it is a public process. It's a public process that all of you are supporting to be a very public, transparent process that builds trust and accountability in, and that there's that kind of reporting back to the community as you're going along. So this process is sort of within that bigger context, right, that you all operate in, of the more public nature. And so often we talk about that, there's sort of that, the group is surrounded by its public and its communities and its stakeholders, and how are we going to be either reporting back or updating them? What do they need to know as you're working together and moving on? I think that's really important.
So I've done it. It does add a certain level, certainly it adds a level of complexity. When I did the Fresno City Council twice, it was the Fresno Bee and the television station, the radio station. When I did the Burbank Airport, there was the LA Times and some Pasadena, Burbank newspaper, etc. So it definitely adds a huge level of complexity and sensitivity. In my view, and I totally, I think we often are very much in agreement here. In my view, the key is much more on you in terms of, as we go through the assessment process, what can you, if we're going to play in the sandbox together, what are the rules we agreed to, and will we stick to the rules? I mean, that's overly simplistic, and yet at the end of the day, that's can we agree that there's going to be a functional methodology approach to this meeting that we can work together appropriately when a lot of people are watching. A lot of people are watching.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you for your presentations. My question is more on how do we get there? And both of you mentioned in your presentation some of the tools that you use for getting us going. The one-on-one discussions, shared goals, start a new chapter, the treatment plan. If I can dig just one layer deeper on that, and how do you decide on what is it that we have to do? How do you arrive at the question that says, okay, this is what I, Paul or Catherine, need to ask the commissioners or staff, these questions? So that way everybody is successful and everybody can say, this is a job well done. Knowing that this is and both of you mentioned this is a very complex challenge. It's a public entity, and somewhere along the line, there's been indicators that each one of us has seen, and I'm sure the public has seen, that have called us to you. This is kind of like a lifeline that we're throwing out on how can we move forward together. And so I understand which the tools you're going to use for getting us there. But how are you going to go home and say, if you were to start your plan right now, what is it that you're going to ask yourself? Okay, this is what needs to be done. What are the main issues that need to be answered in order to get us functioning together? So that way, everybody's successful, everybody has a buy-in and says, okay, this has been a very successful endeavor. So if I'm on the line and asking, this is more of how you're going to do it, you haven't really thought about it, please say that. But I just feel, in order to get us there, what is it that is going to drive you to say this is what needs to be done?
So, again, if we go back to these, maybe I use this analogy too much. If I had to go to my doctor today because I got a little skin rash going on. And so that's why I'm kind of in the mindset of, what's your diagnosis, what's your prognosis, what's the treatment. When I come into a situation like this, I'm going to have some core basic protocol interview questions I'm going to have, basic questions. What's going on, help me understand what the landscape is, what's working well, what's working poorly. If we were to do some kind of work together, what would you hope to accomplish? What do you see as the obstacles? Right off the top of my head, those are some classic initial questions that you're going to have. In our business, how do I say this? The epiphanies come from, in the moment, figuring out what the right question is to ask. And that sometimes, most of the time, is not necessarily what you lead with here. It's what comes out of some of those sort of core questions there. To now try to answer your question directly, I don't know that, right now, I don't know enough to say that there is some work that I can help you with that will work. I don't know that yet. Because again, and if we can't get being on the city council, member at Belmont for 5, you got to at least get to 3. You got to be able to count to at least 3. And, part of that whole process is to see if there's at least 3 of you who are on the same page, that in terms of where you see you want to go, how you want to get there, how open you are to help, and willing to, to stick to that and move it forward. So until I learn that, and you can tell you that, any sort of speculation of what we might do is just speculation.
Similarly, my sort of 3 core questions, I like that framing of it, to start with, and there's always more, is sort of tell me what your current situation is. Because you're all in a current situation that is true to you, so you're all right. If I can just point that out. What would success look like to you in the future? What would future success look like? Kind of describe that scenario. If the world worked perfectly in your eyes, what would that look like for your commission? And what are the obstacles? Well, I'll say the positive first. What are the opportunities to get there? What are the things that this group has that is really supporting that future vision? What are the things that might be holding you back from that? And what usually the sort of mop-up question I ask is, what else do I need to know? And I think also what is always really important is that I think you'd agree, pop in if you don't, that, our kind of job is to, facilitate means to make easy. And so our job is to always make your work easier versus sort of doing that work for it to work. And so a specific example, is that our job is to help you understand each other better, hear each other better, talk about what that future, maybe common vision is together, and see what is needed to get you there. And often when groups are, I think, stuck, just like I've done a lot of mediation, and just with 2 people or larger groups, often when people find themselves sort of stuck and unsure about how to move forward is when they're really clear about what they don't want any more of, or what hasn't been working well for them. And pulling out what would work or what would be more positive can be really important to that. We're all human, right? So it's easy to get in that kind of what doesn't work for me, and so, but we can't act on what doesn't work for us, right? We have to sort of positively say, this is what I need to move forward, not just, I don't like this or that. Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird analogy, so sometimes I stop and make sure I'm making sense. So I think that is really important too, so that you all educate each other with whoever's help about how you want to move forward, how you do that with coming from the same page to do that, so that you're not going like this, right? Usually when groups are in conflict, things are going like this and everybody's not in alignment. So those are kind of the core things that we would, talk with you about to start. So.
Thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Brennan?
Some questions. Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate it. So, the process. When I think about this board, and I consider the process that you guys outlined, which is a series of one-on-one interviews, which would then result in a compiled report that would come back to the board for us to read, the public to read. I wonder about that. First of all, just so we're clear, are the interviews public? How do the interviews happen?
Am I first this time?
I think so.
If I can, and I would rely on Jean, right, to answer this question for us. The one-on-one interviews, if that is possible, are confidential, including my notes. So my client doesn't even get those. So I'm the one person that is kind of hearing everything, and that's important for a number of reasons, so that people can be open, so that we, as we were discussing before, that the public venue and environment in which you all operate has, this is one of the constraints, is that in this format, it's a different conversation than being able to speak one-on-one directly and know that what comes out of that conversation is that blended, this is what this group cares about, this is what is important to this group, this is what this group sees as the challenges on moving forward without individually attributing that to any specific person.
Jean, is that correct, that the interviews are not public?
The interviews do not have to be conducted in public, but they can merely be information gathering interviews that would then end up in a public report.
Right.
So that means the information gathered has to be part of a public report?
Yes.
Well, maybe we'll just make some clarity. I mean, Catherine and I are in violent agreement on this one. I mean, the more candid and the more the person feels like what they're saying to us is confidential, the more likely we're going to get good information. And so my approach is exactly the same as Catherine. My notes are private. And yet when it comes to the public report, that's another one of those complexity issues that we want to make sure that it is communicated in a way that is, again, Catherine didn't use this term, but it's, I think we're saying the same, it's theme-based. There's no, Pietro said that, and Jim said that, and Sabrina said that. There are themes that would come out that there was some agreement around whatever it is. If there's like minor situations going on with individuals, that likely, rarely to never would end up in the report.
And so, Jean, is it possible for the public to put in a PRA request for their notes if they're doing work in the district?
Those are not turned over to the district, those are not district property.
So then they can't be requested in a PRA request?
They would not be district property, they would not be part of the public record.
And I'll even add, because I feel in my agreement for this kind of work, that's in my contract with my client, that my notes are not turned over. And that for me, as a sort of practitioner, that's kind of a deal breaker if that can't work, because it just, it so undermines that sort of assessment process that it's a waste of your money, frankly. Absolutely. And so you know, that's for me a real strong point, and probably a lot of other practitioners too. And I like that kind of, you know, thinking notes private, report public, and form of report is something that we work out. Right. You know, what does that look like? And there's usually a, you know, draft review opportunity for whoever has been interviewed to read, you know, that kind of summary document, whatever that looks like, or a presentation, and say, well, wait a minute, we talked for, you know, half an hour about this issue, you missed it. You know, that needs to be in there as part of this. We're trying to paint a picture, right?
Is that for public, that discussion?
That,
reviewing the draft and then...
that would have to be worked out, but I'm not sure what...
Would that part be public?
Yeah.
The report that's...
You mean a draft?
The district will have, that is what the public records.
But the draft...
The report that's turned over is all that the district will have.
Oh, so the public won't hear the discussion about the draft report?
That's not the report that they'll be preparing, that's a draft.
And how does the discussion about the draft report happen? Is that at a closed session meeting? Or
I would anticipate that would be, from what they're describing, a one-on-one interview with the folks that already interviewed.
So once the report was completed as a draft, then there'd be a one-on-one conversation with each of the board members to review the report individually and then take back those comments and add to the report before it was finalized. Would there be a second draft process, or what would that look like?
Well, that's one option. I think those are the kind of details you have to work out as you step forward, and that's making sure everybody's on that same page, right? With what are the responsibilities that you have, and what public access is for certain things, and how do you manage that? And that, I think, that's one option. That's one way I've done that. And but if there's a constraint or a reason not to do that, then you have to find another way.
I appreciate you guys being here because you're educating us about the process, and I think if we had known more about the process in advance, then maybe some of these questions would be more useful, I guess. So I'm just kind of processing what you're telling me, and questions are coming up, but I know I'm going to have some additional questions later, so I hope I can figure out a way to get those questions answered, because I didn't expect the process to be as it's been described at all. I was thinking more in terms of this being a board dynamics sort of process, where you are working with the group in a way that would help the group work together. So to me, what you've described is a process of interviews and then a resulting report, but I don't see how that would help the board interact as a group, because what we have to do here on this board is work together for, you know, in the best interest of the Harbor District. So there's skills that we need as a group to be able to do that we currently don't seem to have. And so that sort of skill building, training, board dynamics thing was more what I was expecting. And this sounds like something like one-on-one interviews, which I personally feel like I just did a lot of, because, you know, we have some pretty deep issues here. You know, I have a harassment complaint against the general manager, and a staff member who's here has a harassment complaint against me. We've got it's been reported in the media that there is a civil grand jury investigation into our district that's happening right now. I know that's probably not that surprising. And there are a lot of other pretty serious issues. So what I'm really interested in is how this board can work together productively and stop being at each other's throats. But I don't at all see how an interview process with a resulting report would help us get to that point. You know, when I did my training with the Special District Association, I went to their training called How to Be an Effective Board Member, And we had a group meeting with, I don't remember, 20, 25 people in the room, and we had a trainer, and we processed all kinds of different scenario situations, and we learned how to work within the group. And that was kind of what I was hoping that we might be learning how to do. The idea of doing interviews with the results of the report, I just don't think that's very useful for us. So I could be wrong, and if it is useful for us, I need to learn how that would be useful, because off the top of my head, just hearing this, it doesn't sound very effective. So I obviously need to do more homework on it, because this isn't what I expected whatsoever. But I'm interested. So I just have a couple questions. We already talked about the transparency issues, which are still pretty vague because it's not clear. I mean, if there was a report produced, I would certainly want to have a couple of opportunities to make, suggestions or changes or give input, revisions. But this isn't the process that I really want. So I'm not sure that it's even worth really commenting on that much further. Now, it was mentioned earlier by Paul that I think it was 2006 that you did this process that you described with this board, or was it 2007?
I don't remember the exact year.
Okay, well, it was not that long ago. Different group, although I'm sure Commissioner remembers that process pretty well. And that was the same sort of thing where you did the interviews and there was a report. Where is that report? Can you get a copy of it?
I don't recall.
Well, Serena, it might be helpful to, Madam Commissioner, to back up. Frankly, one of the things that in this business, you got to be willing to be fired or never hired. And so if you hire a facilitator who says they can come in here and put together, I could put together an agenda right now that I think would probably work. If I knew the backdrop, if I knew everything that was going on, if I knew how much agreement there was, if I knew where the disagreement was. If someone comes in here and says they can facilitate some kind of a situation, retreat, workshop, whatever you want to call it, and work on and help this group, this commission work better together, without understanding that backdrop, that is very dangerous. That is very dangerous.
Well, thank you for that input, but it would seem to me that this was, in order to address the depth of the problems here with this board, there would need to be definitely an information gathering period, and I can see where those interviews would be important. But if it ended with a report, to me, that just sounds useless. I mean, it would need to be, we interview, maybe we do a report, but now we're going to do some sort of a process which is going to help the board learn to interact together. If it just ends with a report, that is definitely going to collect some dust. He can't even remember what happened to your last report.
That's not going to meet your needs, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said. A, agree with you again, and B, just clarify, I think, where we're going like this, which is that report is just the roadmap to what comes next.
Right.
And it's not supposed to be the end. What it's supposed to be is should this group move forward with a facilitator, number one, because if you didn't need to do that, then why spend the money? And if you're going to continue to work with somebody, what are we kind of as process experts saying or suggesting might be helpful to your group? So is that training? Is that a retreat? If that's, I'll caveat all this with I have no idea what could be possible with our, Brown Act considerations and everything. But what's the way you're going to get from here today to there, which is where you want to go? And so that report is supposed to be that roadmap. It's a decision point, but it's also that roadmap on what comes next. So I'm glad I'm glad that wasn't clear, because that's really important to
It
make
is
sure we're clear, yeah.
Those recommendations are going to include our, what our treatment, what we suggest is going to be the most effective way to get the greatest value, to get the best results.
Because that sounds, boy, that bar is really going off tonight.
They're having fun.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard of that noise over there, but I guess I don't hang out here that often. So that helped me a lot. Thank you for explaining that. So it sounds like the report's sort of a first step in, here's the report, here's where their strengths and weaknesses. I think everybody knows this board is dysfunctional at this point. I mean, it's just the way it is. But what I'm interested in is, how do we go from being a dysfunctional board to being a functional board? And I know that that's not going to be a quick or easy process. So I'm concerned that the other board members may not recognize that it is a process. You can't just ask somebody to do a couple interviews, give you a report, and call it a day. That isn't really dealing with the problem, and it won't provide results. So that's something, I'm just letting you guys know, that's something that I'm thinking about. That's not a question, but just kind of communication about something.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is kind of, you want a process that builds sort of that long-term, and the word sustainable is such a word, sort of stability and better functioning.
That's what
and maybe I'll take a quick second to just sort of ask, maybe even by show of hands, because I think I know the answer, but it's useful for the two of us and also your third candidate to know if each one of you is unhappy with the status quo and ready to leave it behind. In other words, if the current situation is not meeting your needs, then if you could raise your hand, that would be helpful. If the current situation isn't meeting your needs very well. So there's not necessarily, and how about, that you'd like to see some change of some sort, and I don't know what that means yet, right? But I think that's always the first question I sort of ask, because if you're happy with the present situation, then you might want to stay there. But my understanding is that this group is not happy with its present situation. Is that correct? And I'm not making any kind of, judgment around that. I'm just sort of saying that, to move from where you're standing now is the kind of first decision. And I think you've signaled that because you've asked us to come in and, this group says it's wanting to go to that different place. So that's your first agreement, really, right? Don't forget that. Because that's the first agreement that you need to make. Other questions?
Is there any other questions?
I'm done right now.
Okay, thank you. I have...
Robert, can we just take a 2-minute break?
Sure,
Or
absolutely.
you continue on?
Actually, why don't
I
we...
just don't want to be disrespectful.
No, actually, why don't we take a 5-minute break, if that's okay, and then I will ask Mike 2 questions. 2 questions, okay? Thank you.
It's me. Are you an ADRNC?
Excuse me.
Sure.
San Francisco.
Oh, you're in the city, okay.
Lived in Belmont for years.
Or IAP2.
Is that?
IAP2, the Public Practitioners Association. I thought you might be an IAP2 person, because it sounds like you worked with a lot of public.
Mostly it's been run by
Okay.
It's intermission time, folks. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking,
And only the best possible.
goodies.
Exactly.
Everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now.
to do chamber board retreats.
The show starts in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
If you go to the website, they have some pages.
That's great, yep. And are you also the producer of the podcasts that are on the website?
No, that's not.
Oh, that's a different, okay. I saw that you did the podcast. I didn't know that you did the...
So I did a session for the Fresno Chamber, and it was one of those where there was all this stuff going on. Chairs of the board was trying to get the chamber president fired, and there was all this politics going on. It's only happened to me a couple of times. I'm sure it's happened to me. But literally, you just have to call the question.
You need a what?
A call from me. I need to make
Oh, I see.
The show starts in 4 minutes.
It might be the earliest meeting. I took the day off today. I had to do that meeting issues because comes in as it's involved. So there's no way.
You and I kind of share that same value.
Yeah, and
we're
very
with us, and
I would have even driven to work and then left work early to come here, to make it here by 5 o'clock. Because I couldn't, and I just thought to myself, at this point, so why don't you take the day off? So I took the day off. Beautiful, beautiful, and it's a chance to run errands and do it.
And so what did they do? Did they decide to...
Yeah. I thought it was good. Get some traffic.
But you did.
No, unfortunately, no.
The show starts in 3 minutes.
Coming this way is not bad, but going the other way, it was
You know, one way that I learned not too long ago was to take Westboro and just go all the way.
Sharp Park.
Yeah, and just go all, I had not taken that before until someone said to try it, and I tried it, and it was like the easiest thing in the world. So now I love doing that.
At the time, when you're coming up from Skyline College,
Yeah.
there was always no police.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I think the speed limit was like 30.
Good to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good to know.
And there's a flashing sign that says your speed is so and so. So when you're coming down that, it's so easy because you really are on the downhill track. It's so easy to speed.
I didn't know that.
But as a know. Sometimes you can see out on the islands.
The show starts in 2
I love
minutes.
that route though. I just love that route. It's so no traffic. It's like no ever any traffic there.
Close encounters. She's from India. She's probably done a lot more.
You have good friends? I'm sorry to hear that. I hope they find something. Something.
But they haven't found it?
Anything. Because it's just very strange and...
There's the hog fishing.
It's just odd.
Apparently, passports are not uncommon with travelers.
Yeah, so those 2 young guys, without, well, they weren't an issue.
Right.
You can buy a passport under 30.
The show starts in 1 minute.
The thing I know is, if there was something going wrong with the plane, the pilots clearly would have radioed in, so it suggests that there was something preventing them from that. Someone or something preventing them.
Something happened so fast.
No.
Because I heard the Chinese reported something on the radar where they noticed the trails or salvations. But they didn't have, it's like they haven't got out of the area yet.
Interesting. Hope they find something.
It's a big one.
777? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And now, on with the show.
So how many people are in San Francisco?
Well, this is the dark
That
age.
must be a huge one,
Is
right?
it
Or
your
are they
intent to ask us for a
I have
decision
the
this evening?
internet and everything.
Can't hear you.
Well, I'm not
about that.
I'm not
Is your
involved with
intent
that one.
to ask us for a decision this evening?
No, I worked on the chamber. I was the deputy director there in the 80s. So we had really only 500 members. So it was a big
My
deal.
assumption is that you wanted to move as quickly as possible.
And people outside of San
For
Francisco.
the special meeting today.
Politics. It's the old example.
Obviously.
It's only the tip of the iceberg. A big part of my job was political affairs.
Well, in San Francisco, there's so many different little associations and groups, and I'm sure the chambers will, they're...
One of my jobs when I went there was to, particularly, so when we lived
Okay, we will continue.
Yeah.
So, let's continue. So I have two questions, and what I'd like to do is, I'd like these two questions to also be asked of Brent Ives, if we get to that point. So I forgot who's going to be first. I lost track.
Go ahead. Post-break, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is this. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, you're both very qualified to do this work, as far as I'm concerned. You're both very qualified to do this work. So I'm going to ask two questions that maybe can help me make a decision. Can you please give me a scenario of, and this is to Commissioner Brennan's point about collaboration and compromise. If you can give me an example, preferably of an agency or a similar agency to a San Mateo County agency where you've had to deal with collaboration and compromise, if you could walk me through the steps that you went through and then the outcome. I know it's a big question.
Well, it's coming off the cuff. I'm trying to think about what would be the most appropriate situation.
And ideally for me, it would be some agency similar to the Harbor District. If it's something within the San Mateo County, even better. And the focus of that work is collaboration and compromise, and the steps you went through, just briefly, now I don't need to hear the whole timeline, and the outcome.
Well, the one that comes to mind, and unfortunately it's outside of San Mateo County, it was the Burbank Airport. It's a commission, it's a joint powers group in that it's the cities of Burbank, Glendale, and I remember the third city. And so from the time that the airport was open, they had huge noise issues from the neighbors. If you've ever flown in and out of Burbank, you know, on landing and departure, you see where the house is there. And they had been in multiple suits and multiple conflict resolution situations with neighbors for years. So there was that sort of overriding issue that they were dealing with as an organization, as a body. The other thing that was a big political deal was the fact that to some degree they all were supposed to have equal seats at the table, and yet because it was the Burbank airport, the perception of the other cities was that Burbank's driving it. And so the process there was frankly somewhat similar to what I would see here. It was when I did the interviews, we really looking for, where are the key outcomes that we're looking for. And frankly, the key outcome that they wanted was less about how to really, it's, again, remember what I started at the beginning, I talked about how doing the strategy piece or the direction piece or the solve the issue piece and then the relationship piece. Well, the issue piece where we're working on was the noise issue. How do we work through this in a more expeditious way? And while we made progress on that, frankly, the biggest issue the group, through the interview process, decided to work on was trust. that there was just a huge lack of trust amongst in that case, the commissioners. So in their case, what we actually did was, again, some follow-up one-on-ones with, in terms of working sort of, it sounds more like a mediation process that Catherine does, was to start, identifying amongst the commissioners what it would take for them to trust each other. And that was a series of one-on-ones. I want to say it was like 2 or 3 through the whole commission. And then by the time we did the offsite, where the public was there and where the media was there, I mean, we were 85-90% there. What I've noticed in a lot of the facilitation I do, we spend much more talking about what we disagree on than what we agree on. So if you can start the conversation with what we agree on, then that builds a foundation for being able to then to address what else is left. Again, on the city council, if I looked at the number of issues we dealt with over a period of time, we spend 90% of the time talking about the 10% we disagreed on, and almost have it overwhelm the 90% we agreed on. So we used that as a foundation. We walked away, and the check-ins I had with the CEO of the commission after that was that it was incredibly much more productive relationships that were much more effective because things happened faster because they had much higher levels of trust, and frankly their individual relationships were better. So that's an example, I think.
Thank you.
By the way, I want to comment something that you just said and Catherine had said earlier, which was, I agree with you. I think you got 2 competent people. And, Catherine's great. She's competent. If you decide to work with her, you're making a good choice. And she said something earlier, which is really, it's about fit. It's what, whether it's style or approach or whatever, and I don't, assuming that this other gentleman is the same level of competence, I think you folks are in a good position.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I would echo that. In good hands, clearly, especially with local government experience. I don't have a San Mateo example. I think, a little bit long ago example from sort of that local level was more of a mediation that I was involved in, actually through community boards in San Francisco, to put together a plan, facilitate working with the Department of the Environment, members of the Audubon Society, members of the SPCA Feral Cat Network, and some other stakeholders to put together a recovery plan for quail in San Francisco. And this kind of came, sort of a small conflict, came to a big problem at a commission meeting when the commissioners at that time were asked to adopt this recovery plan, and everybody said, wait a minute, we had nothing to do with putting this together. And so the head of the Department of the Environment at that time came to us at community boards and said, can you help us with this, because this is a priority that the city wants to see happen, but we can't have the level of acrimony from our public. It wasn't the commission. It was, they clearly, people were saying this can't go forward. So we worked, and you mentioned the word trust, and that's always a word that we start to talk about when groups aren't working well together, is what can be done to build trust. And so we had a series of several different meetings and tours. Ultimately, that plan was rewritten, and everybody came to that meeting. It was universally supported and adopted, and actually commemorated in a Farley cartoon. Remember Farley? So that was kind of fun. That's just a quick example of that. And I think what you're trying to get more specific about, if I'm understanding you correctly, is what does that look like? And the project I did last year, that report basically said, the co-equal goals of the next phase of what happens need to be this. So we got really clear on defining what that group wanted to see happen. So that was kind of the destination. And we worked out through kind of follow-up from everybody I interviewed with, and me kind of putting together, like, here's what I think as a next suggestion for your process could be effective in the time you wanted also, because for them it was, getting their training program back online quickly. Here's the decisions you need to make in this amount of time, and kind of articulating those and defining those. So one really important one in that example was that what are the expectations we can have of each other, because some people were staff, some people were volunteers, some people were board members, and nobody had the same set of shared expectations about what they could expect or what they were being asked to provide to their colleagues. And so that became one kind of product. Like, let's talk about what are the kind of ground rules or guidelines that you're all going to use to work together, and what can you agree on. And that was kind of the relationship piece of it. And I think there's also usually a substantive piece to these things. What are we working on? There's the relationship piece. It's really important. And there's that kind of process piece of how do we work together that often needs to be addressed. Often people know what they're working on, right? It's the how are we working together that causes challenges sometimes. And so treating it as that opportunity that it is to move forward, what does that look like? Is it that, and if it's a conversation that this group needs to have, well, what's the form that you can or are allowed to have under the law? Can you do a commission retreat? Does it have to be in a public setting? What does that need to look like? So you can define that. Is that clear enough? Because that feels a little squishy.
Thank you. No, it's clear enough, except I'd like to know, you went through the step, what was the outcome of the quail issue?
Well, the quail issue, in that case, that was many years ago. They adopted, it was universally adopted and supported at the commission meeting, the revised plan, because once everybody had the opportunity of those different groups that were involved to be a part of it, and we worked through that. We essentially, I and another mediator worked on that together, and we just got the group back on track, and then they finished their work. We actually kind of stepped out at that point because of the nature of it, and we were volunteers. So we said, now you're working well together. They had built a little bit more trust, and they knew that they already knew what their end product was going in, which actually was a report in that case because it had to be approved by the commission, so they could go and do these restoration projects. And the Farley cartoon, of course. So that was fun. But, in the case of the training program redevelopment last year, the outcome of that was it became an agenda for the group of all the trainers. They all came together a couple of months after that process was, the interviews report was done, and kind of had a forum. And they dove into the real nitty-gritty of their program to revise that. And they're supposed to come out with their new training this July.
Thank you.
And it did take longer than they thought, of course.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sorry. And ultimately, they had developed at that, when they came together as a group down in Los Angeles, they mapped out a really ambitious schedule for themselves of what would happen next. Mm-hmm. And my latest understanding from talking with one of the people involved was that they had to give themselves a little extra time, as these things often happen. Okay. So.
Thank you, and thank you for both of your examples. I'm familiar with Burbank Airport and their challenges, because we talk about that where I work at Oakland Airport. Oh, yeah. And I've had the pleasure of working with community boards when I worked with Neighborhood Watch in San Francisco, so I'm familiar with your work. Mm-hmm. Now, my second question and my last question, again, with your examples, you're both very qualified for this, actually, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. So now, can you please, now that you give me an example on some good examples, is there anything that makes your particular practice, and this, I guess you'll begin, Ms. McCracken, unique? So I'm looking here for like a key differentiator. I mean, again, you're both very similar, and you would both be great, I think, for this work. But do you have a key differentiator, something that makes you unique in the work that you do? And
well, I kind of want to echo what you said, which is you all have a reaction to whoever's talking with you about working with you, and I want you to trust that reaction. And I guess that's kind of my key differentiator, is that you might have a different reaction to me than to somebody else that might, both positive, and I really, and I know Peter, you and I, we talked about this in this sort of, interviewing more than one person, having a process where there is a real clear decision that you'd like to continue working with somebody, and making sure that you feel good about who you're picking. So I'd say first and foremost, trust yourself to know who you're reacting well to. And if it's not me, I don't take that personally. Do you know what I mean? Because we can't all get along, but we kind of just gel better with some people over others. As far as a differentiating thing, I think I just had a really diverse background and worked with a lot of different things, both sort of more one-on-one mediation as well as more public projects. Projects that have involved the kind of context we're talking about and would have to work through of what you've asked the facilitator to work on with you, kind of taking place within this bigger context that you all face, and other substantive, really important issues that you all care about and want to see move forward well. So I think that's helpful, and it sounds like you have a lot of that same experience too, which is clearly you don't want to have to worry about that. You want to be able to move through those, how you structure whatever happens with the person you hire, so that everybody's needs are met, both, and most importantly, your needs, the commissioner's needs, and staff needs for things like public accountability and access and all that, and in having that conversation with your facilitator.
Thank you.
Well, during my opening comments, I talked about, the strategic alignment, strategic approach, and I think that, at the surface of it, it doesn't necessarily sound differentiator, but there's a level below the surface that is important. So, again, I found that I'm just calling groups, boards, leadership teams, commissions, councils, that the more that you can help them create some kind of direction to solve a problem, to get from point A to B, and at the same time improve the relationships, that's very different. And the differentiator for me is, I don't know why it happens, but frankly, I get a lot of dysfunctional groups. Leadership teams that are just butting heads, councils that are butting heads, and so I don't know how to describe it. It's this ability to stay engaged, to be working on the relationships. Literally at the same time, we potentially could be looking at, where do we want to go? What's our direction? What's the problem we want to solve? And so at the end of the day, in addition to us being able to have a better process, better working relationships, we also, because of that, we've got to figure out a better way to solve problems, do what we need to get done, if that makes sense. That to me is my differentiator.
Thank you. That concludes my questions. I know that Commissioner Brennan, you have an additional question?
Yeah, I do. Just some things came up while I was listening to you guys talking that I didn't ask before. So with, I don't deal very well with vague examples, and it's hard to kind of extrapolate out from some vague descriptions of processes with other boards and stuff. We don't have time for you guys to go into the detail, plus it's none of our business anyway, but I'm trying to figure out, because if we decide to move forward with facilitation or board dynamics or what were some of the other words I heard? I like these words, learning new things, strategic alignment, change management, things like that. I just want to make sure that we're not just going to be spending money and not get any results out of it. That's important to me. We have some pretty significant problems on this board, which are already costing the taxpayers money in the form of attorney billings, related to harassment, related to the board majority's request for an attorney general investigation into me. I mean, it goes on and on. So because, and, you know, I know you guys didn't have time and you weren't getting paid to do research into our board, but, you know, if you consider the issues, and I'm just going to name a couple of kind of heavy-hitting issues that have come up with this board that have kind of crippled us. You know, we've got Brown Act violations, which have been an ongoing issue. We've got, you know, multiple harassment complaints related to gender and sexual orientation. We've got transparency issues and open government issues that have been raised repeatedly by the public. We've got financial mismanagement issues that have been raised by the public. We've got this attorney general business, which is bizarre. And, you know, all of these problems would seem to be very counterproductive to do the work that the board needs to do. So I desperately really want to fix some of these problems, but when we've got people at each other to the level that's happening here on this board, and we've got, you know, attorneys involved, and we've got requests for you know, the Attorney General investigations, and we've got, you know, investigations happening all over the place. Is it being too optimistic to think? I mean, really, how would we tackle all of that? I just don't, and it's, if we don't tackle it, I don't see how it could really, I mean, is it better just to wait for the voters to decide? Is it financially better for the district? I honestly really want to make the best decision for the district, and given the level of problems, it almost feels like it would be better to let the voters decide in the next election and just hope that they fix the problem versus trying to fix problems that are so deeply embedded that they just, and given, you know, what's already transpired and what's in process now, you can't roll this stuff back, you know? How do we, can you guys get more specific with me about how this level of dysfunction could possibly be, whether it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to fix it, or if it's better just to let the voters fix it? And those, sorry to be dumping that on you, but I mean, I really think we have to make an intelligent decision about how we spend the district's money. And if we're just doing this and it's a bunch of mental gymnastics, you know, that costs a lot of money, I don't, you know, I don't know, I don't feel really good about it right now. So I'm wondering if you could, if you have anything to follow that. Sorry.
Well, I think it's my turn to go first. So earlier on, Catherine did the little poll there. And I saw at least 4 hands go up, and maybe that we dislike where we are and prefer to be somewhere else. And in my view, that's the first step you got to take. I can't do that at this point for you. You got to decide, you know, if there's enough of you who want it to be different, to engage in some hard work to make it better, so we can actually be a functional group that serves the voters. I mean, at this point, if I look at that, you know, one of the language things that is important to me is that for years, often as groups we're stuck in consensus. And consensus is milquetoast. It's agreement. Do we have enough people on the group, 3 or more, that we have enough agreement about not only where we're going to go, but how we're going to work with each other, treat each other, and behave with each other? And know that we may not get, if you can get that, if you can get 3 or more of you that say we want to go there, and here's the rules, here's the sandbox we're going to play in, and here's the way we agree to play in the sandbox together, and then it probably makes sense to invest some money so that you start moving the organization forward. If you're unable to get that agreement, then you're wasting your money and your time.
I think I would mostly kind of echo what you're saying. I think that that decision is one that is completely in your hands, the five of you, in consultation with, staff and others. And I think that and I think part of what a facilitator can be helpful to do is to kind of force what might be a tough conversation with yourself sometimes about what's going to happen if a shift doesn't happen, right? Because something will happen. And what is that going to look like? And if, from what you're saying, the current situation is a really, really challenging one, and I'm sure has been very challenging both sort of personally and publicly for all of you, then there seems to be a lot of incentive to move forward in a different way. I don't have the answer to the question that you asked, actually, Commissioner Brennan. Should it just be up to the voters to fix it? Because I'm not sure what that means in terms of that, so the dynamic is what it is now, and I guess so the question becomes, is that dynamic acceptable to the group for the next, what would that be, 7 months or 6 months or whatever, right? Or are there things that this group wants to start to work on that would be helpful and productive regardless of what happens or the composition of this group in the future? So piggyback, but I definitely agree with what you're saying, which is that first kind of step of it, to say the current situation is no longer okay, is the one to take. And if a group's not, I'm not speaking specifically here, but if any group isn't interested in taking that first step, then I would definitely agree that you would not be spending your money wisely. Because what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk, and then we're going to find out, then we're going to find that some people, if they're happy with the current situation, what's the incentive to change anything? And then that will probably kind of further erode the group's working relationships and trust. So I think it is really critical that this group, from what I know and what you've shared, thank you, tonight, be on that same page about, we do want to take this first step with somebody. Because what I hear you saying is, I want to feel that assurance that this is a good step for this group to be taking. So.
One more shot at the question. So if you've been around San Mateo County for a long period of time, the city of Belmont has been known for years as having the most dysfunctional councils in San Mateo County. And when and this would have been in the mid to late 90s, my wife was the executive director of the little Belmont Chamber of Commerce. And so every time we would go out with couples for dinner, etc., a topic would come up on how dysfunctional the council was, and why is it that way? And pretty much the consensus was that normal people that don't want to be dysfunctional are not going to run because they don't want to play in that sandbox. And so the group put the push for Linda to run for council, and she said, no, I would be inappropriate because I'm not politically correct. I don't have the skills that Paul does. Maybe you could talk this guy into doing it. So it happened. When working with dysfunctional people sometimes, people tend to undervalue very much the impact they have on other people, both positive and negative. And so just having one more person on the council that appeared to be, reasonable did cause, by the way, the next round of elections to have some other people run, and the council became much more functional. But you have to start somewhere. I don't know that just sort of backing up and saying, let's throw up the hands and let the voters decide. From my view, you're resisting your fiduciary responsibility to voters. That maybe isn't more an opinion than fact.
Thank you. Any other questions before we have a commissioner discussion?
I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your time being here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to echo that too on behalf of the board. Thank you for taking the time tonight to share your experiences, your insights, and some of your ideas. So now we're going to deliberate and discuss this. Okay, so.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
President, he just presented himself. He needed a coughing fit, so
Okay, why don't we,
just adjourn, give it a minute. So
yeah, why don't we, since we have a commissioner out of the room, why don't we adjourn for 5 minutes, and then that'll give us enough time to...
Yeah.
Oh,
There he comes, okay.
thank you. So, what I was, yes, of course. What we were just saying is that we were going to sort of deliberate now and have a discussion amongst the board to make a decision, whatever that may be. So, commissioners, what are your thoughts on moving forward? And I know that Commissioner Brennan had mentioned Brent Ives also, so let's keep that in mind as well. So commissioners, what would you like to do? First of all, I guess the question is, are we ready to make a decision based on the two candidates we saw tonight?
I would be ready.
Okay, I hear one.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The question is, my question was, based on the two candidates we have tonight, are we ready to make a decision? Or again, there's Mr. Brent Ives, who was not here tonight. And I know earlier there was a suggestion that Commissioner Brennan can reach out to Mr. Ives and have him email or contact us and express interest and possibly be interviewed at another meeting. So that raises the issue, actually, that raises the issue of sort of one of urgency. How quickly do we want to make a decision? Raises the issue of, do we want to, knowing, having met Ms. McCracken and Mr. Wright, do we still want to interview Mr. Ives? So these are questions that are sort of swirling in my mind. And Commissioner Holsinger.
Thank you. Well, I think if we're going to move forward promptly to make a decision and make a choice and still accommodate Commissioner Brennan's perception that someone else wanted to be part of this process, be reasonable to go ahead and have our discussion based upon the interviews tonight, but to defer a decision and put it on the agenda at next week's meeting and give this other individual between now and close of business Friday to express his interest in coming to be interviewed at the next meeting. Make that something of a priority in your scheduling as president of the agenda, setting of the agenda, to allow that process. Perhaps, what time is it now? Pardon?
20 to 7.
Okay, so we've been 2 hours in this process. We'll be at maximum an hour process for that individual. And then we can plan on making a decision whether to go forward, and if so, with which one of the three at the next meeting.
Point of information, if I may, Mr. President and Board.
Yes.
Next week's meeting agenda is going to be extremely lengthy, and I would urge that if in fact you wish to have Mr. Ives come before you, that you schedule that for the April 2nd board meeting.
Either that or schedule the meeting to start at 5 o'clock and have the first hour be allocated solely to...
You certainly could.
Solely to that. I mean, I would be more in favor of doing that than to deferring it longer than longer. So if this person does express their desire to be interviewed and make their presentation, we can schedule it. Do we have enough time, if we know by the close of business on Friday, Ms. Savory, if we know by
posting purposes.
For posting purposes, we can schedule the early start at 5 o'clock?
Yes.
Again, if I may, this is mechanics. We would have to hear from Mr. Ives tomorrow so that we can create an agenda, because the agenda needs to be posted tomorrow. And we would either have to add that to it, or we could make a special meeting agenda for just that purpose, just as you've done today. But we basically have not too much time.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion?
Go ahead.
I'd like to suggest that if we do have it, if we do have this for the next meeting, that it be a special meeting at the beginning, and then we go to our regular meeting after. That way,
I'm fine with
gives
that.
flexibility. You know, he doesn't know that I've been asked to contact him. I don't know what his schedule's like tomorrow. So quickly I can get him on the phone, but I will do my best to.
That sounds fine with me, commissioners. Is that okay with everyone else? Okay, well then let's proceed in that direction where Commissioner Brennan will contact Mr. Ives and see if he is available for next Wednesday's meeting in the first part of the meeting, so we could get that out of the way and then continue with the rest of it would be a special meeting, and then we would go into our regular meeting. So it would be an earlier meeting.
At what time would you want to start that?
5 o'clock.
How about, yes, 5 o'clock would be good. I'm hoping an hour would be plenty of time for that. So,
I'm just estimating based, we've been here 2 hours with these two, so.
right, that makes sense. And so with regards to, thank you, so we got that part squared away. So now with regards to these two folks who were here tonight.
Before we get into that, isn't it more appropriate for the general manager to contact this person?
It would be appropriate, but since Commissioner Brennan had already offered, I think that would be fine. I mean, it doesn't matter to me as long as you contact the person.
The ultimate proof in the pudding, so to speak, is if this gentleman communicates in writing by email or fax or whatever with Mr. Grinnell that he would like to be part of that he would have liked to have been a part of it tonight if given the opportunity. He'd like to be a part of it on Wednesday.
Okay, well
So
then.
the way I remember the request was that I contact him, ask him to send an email to the general manager and CC the board.
Please. That would be perfect.
That he
Thank
would
you.
like to attend.
Yes, from a process perspective, that would be perfect. Thank you. That would be great. Thank you so much for that. And so that will be underway. So now, back to tonight's guests. What would you like to do?
I suggest, Mr. President, we wait until we finalize the third interview and then do our deliberation.
Okay, fair enough. Is everyone else okay with that? That sounds fair to me, that we have our broader discussion after we've heard the third person at
And
the
if
special
anybody
meeting.
wants to refresh their memory on the two people we met tonight, there's going to be a video, so there's that opportunity.
Okay. Great, thank you. So that concludes this outside facilitator for Harbor Commission functioning item, and the only other thing on the agenda is adjournment. So do I hear? I hear a motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second? I hear a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
We now return control of your television set to you. Until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the outer limits.
left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. Yes, I'm stuck in the middle with you. And I'm wondering what it is I should do. It's so hard to keep the smile from my face. Losing control, yeah, I'm all over the place. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you. When you started out with nothing and you're proud that you're a self-made man. And your friends, they all come calling, slap you on the back and say, please, please. Trying to make some sense